McKinney was the kind of town where the sun always looked too bright, and yet somehow the cold never left Io's bones. 17 years old, silent, invisible, surviving. She lived in her uncle's house, but not like a daughter, more like furniture. She cleaned before dawn, cooked before anyone else stirred, fetched water from down the hill, 2 heavy jerry cans banging against her thin knees. They never said thank you. Her aunt's voice carried louder than the town's mosque. Lazy thing. You eat our food and still dream of fashion? You better wake up and find a husband. But Io didn't want a husband. She wanted freedom. Not the kind you shout about, the kind you sketch. Under her rusted bed frame, she hid a notebook wrapped in 2 layers of old fabric. Inside it, gowns that belonged on global runways. Silhouettes born of midnight imagination. Bold reds, soft blues, African prints cascading like waterfalls. She didn't just draw clothes. She designed a world she could live in. She had no phone, no mirror. Her body was thin from years of being last in line, last to eat, last to speak, last to matter. Sometimes she would sit outside after everyone had gone to sleep. The stars above McKinney were fierce, uncaring but brilliant. And in those moments, she would whisper to herself, "One day, they'll say my name with respect." But reality didn't care for dreams. Her uncle was colder than the cement floor she slept on. One evening, he slapped her for defending herself when his son stole her sewing needle. "You live here by grace," he growled. "Speak again and you'll sleep in the street." So she said nothing, even when they told her she was being married off in a week to a man 3 times her age. "He's rich," her aunt said. "They'll make a woman out of you." That night, Io didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, wondering if her mother, who died when she was 8, could see her now. Was she proud? Ashamed? Or just heartbroken? The only thing Io knew for certain was that if she stayed, she'd lose herself completely, and yet her dream still burned. Quiet, small, fierce. She opened her sketchbook one last time that night, drew a girl in a red dress, running barefoot through the dark towards something unseen. In the morning, she would pack her dream and vanish into the world. It came without warning. The announcement. Io had just returned from the market, her hands raw from carrying vegetables in the midday heat, when she walked in and saw her aunt smiling, a rare, dangerous thing. He said yes, her aunt beamed. "You're getting married, next Saturday." Married? The word felt like ash in her mouth. The man's name was Chief Bamidele, 46, oil money, twice divorced, a daughter older than Io. He had seen her once, when she was kneeling by the gate, scrubbing floors. He said she was quiet, said she looked obedient. That was enough. Her aunt called it a blessing. Her uncle grunted in approval. No one asked Io. "You're lucky," her aunt said, folding wrappers into a dusty trunk. "You think someone will marry you with those pipe cleaner arms and daydream eyes?" Io didn't reply. She never did. What was the point? Inside, her stomach twisted. She had drawn wedding dresses before, lace, elegance, meaning. But this felt like being auctioned. Her chest felt tight, her breath shorter each day. At night, she sat on the edge of her mat, sketching in the dark. This time, the bride wore red. Not a deep romantic crimson, but blood red. The kind of red that screams. In the sketch, the girl's eyes were wide open. She wasn't smiling. She was running. Each day after that felt like a countdown to her burial. Her aunt measured her waist with string. Neighbors whispered about the lucky girl. The man sent her money for shoes, ones she never picked. And then, 3 days before the wedding, she overheard the man on the phone. He said, laughing, "She's quiet. That's all I need. No mouth, no questions." That night, Io stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. It was cracked down the middle. She stared at her reflection, one eye clear, one distorted. Maybe that was who she was now, half real, half broken. But something ancient stirred in her, a rebellion passed down from the women who came before her, her mother, her grandmother, their mothers. She opened her sketchbook, tore out one of the pages, folded it neatly, placed it under her pillow like a prayer. Then she packed a tiny cloth bag with 2 old dresses, a cracked bar of soap, and her sketchbook, her soul stitched in paper. At 4:17 a.m., when the town was still breathing slow, she slipped out the back gate. No goodbye, no shoes, no fear left, only fire. The bus smelled like engine oil and old fufu, seats torn, windows stuck halfway. Io didn't care. She sat by the window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the city of McKinney fade behind her like a ghost she'd buried too late. She didn't look back. Not once. Her bag sat on her lap, light but sacred. 2 dresses, a sketchbook, and the courage stitched between her ribs. The road to Umusa stretched like a lifeline. Long, cracked, uncertain. She didn't know anyone there, didn't have money for more than a week of food, didn't have a plan. But she had left, and in that moment, leaving was enough. She didn't sleep, couldn't. The images played like film reels in her mind. Her aunt's laughter, her uncle's cold eyes, Chief Bamadele's hand on her wrist that day in the courtyard. Her heart threatened to fold in on itself. And then she remembered her sketchbook. She pulled it out, gently flipping to the page she'd drawn last. The red wedding dress. The girl running barefoot across the night. And she smiled. "You're doing it," she whispered to the girl on the page. "We're running." Umusa rose like a beast out of the morning fog. Taller buildings, louder streets, fast-talking vendors shouting prices in 3 languages. Music thumped from car speakers, sweat and spice lingered in the air. Io felt like a speck in a painting, unimportant yet alive. She wandered, hungry, blisters growing on her feet, refused by 3 guest houses, until she found a small church-run women's shelter tucked between a bakery and a mechanic's stall. The matron, a stout woman named Mama Toby, looked her up and down. "You run from something or someone?" Io didn't answer, just held out her sketchbook. Mama Toby looked through it slowly, her eyes softened. "You're not useless," she said. "We'll give you a mat, you find work." 2 days later, she landed a job as a cleaner in a fading art gallery. No pay, just food and a corner mattress in the storage room. The gallery was dusty, ceiling fans wheezed, sculptures half broken, paintings faded by sun. But Io felt peace, and then she saw him. In the back room, beside a shattered bust, stood a man with a limp. Late 30s, eyes like overcast skies. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He moved like someone who'd once danced but no longer remembered how. That night, Mama Toby whispered, "That's Kola, the sculptor. Lost his wife 5 years ago. Since then, he only keeps the silence." Io nodded. Something in her chest stirred. She had entered the city running from her past. But maybe, just maybe, she had walked straight into her story. The gallery smelled of turpentine, old wood, and forgotten dreams. Faded light fell through cracked windows, casting patterns on the dusty floor like a patchwork quilt. Statues lined the walls, unfinished, chipped, abandoned. Paintings hung lopsided, their colors bleeding into silence. Io swept carefully. She didn't rush. Every corner, every crack, every base of every sculpture, she cleaned like it was holy. She didn't speak much. The other staff barely noticed her. But someone did. Kola. He wasn't like other men Io had met. He didn't shout, didn't command, didn't look at her the way others did, with possession or pity. He moved through the gallery like a ghost. A tall man, late 30s, with broad shoulders and a quiet limp that told of pain deeper than bones. His studio was always locked. But Io heard him sometimes, late at night, tools clinking, stones scratching against metal. He never greeted her, just a nod sometimes. A pause in his steps when she wiped the dust off his older works with delicate fingers. One afternoon, Io lingered by a cracked marble statue. A woman's face, mouth slightly open like she was about to sing. But the eyes were unfinished. Kola stepped in quietly, caught her staring. "You like that one?" he asked, voice low, rough like gravel soaked in honey. She nodded. "She looks like she's waiting to feel alive." Kola froze. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, Io didn't feel small, just seen. Days passed. She worked, he sculpted. They barely spoke, but their silences began to breathe. One morning, while scrubbing the backroom floor, Io dropped her sketchbook. It slid under a bench. She didn't notice. Kola did. Later that evening, after everyone left, he found it. He sat alone, flipping through it, and what he saw shook something loose in his chest. Bold designs, African elegance, raw imagination. Io's world was loud and fearless on those pages, nothing like the quiet girl who barely met his eyes. The next morning, without a word, Kola left 3 scraps of fabric folded neatly on a shelf in the storage room. No note, no explanation, just an invitation. That night, Io picked them up, her hands trembling. She threaded a borrowed needle, lit a candle, and began to sew. She didn't know it then, but something powerful had started. A conversation between 2 wounded artists, between flame and rain. Kola didn't ask questions. Not about where Io came from, not why she walked like she was always ready to flee. Not even when he saw her sleeping in the storage room, curled up next to thread, fabric, and her battered sketchbook. He respected silence, because silence had been his companion for years. But Ayo's silence was different. It wasn't empty, it was full of things she didn't know how to say, dreams she didn't believe she deserved, wounds too deep to name. Kola watched her work. She didn't just clean, she restored, treated broken things like they mattered. One afternoon, he found her gently brushing dust off a wooden mask that had cracked down the cheek. She looked up and whispered, "It's still beautiful." And something inside him moved. Kola hadn't sculpted in 5 years. Not since that night, the accident, the headlights, the scream, the silence after. He lost his wife, lost his unborn son, lost himself. The gallery became his cage. His hands, once celebrated across West Africa, had turned to stone. He couldn't create without drowning in guilt. But that evening, after flipping through Ayo's sketchbook, he couldn't sleep. The lines, the confidence, the risk. It awakened something buried. The next morning, he stepped into his locked studio, pulled out a slab of unfinished clay, and began again, slowly, clumsily, but for the first time in years, without pain. Ayo didn't know, not yet, but she felt it. The energy in the air had changed. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like music no one had started playing yet. She spent her nights sewing, fingers blistering, eyes stinging, but heart pulsing with something she hadn't felt in years: aliveness. Sometimes Kola would pass the back room and pause, just for a second, to hear the soft rhythm of the needle, the hum of her breath. It reminded him of rain on an iron roof. Steady, beautiful. One night he left a cup of warm ginger tea by her sewing table. No words. She found it, smiled. It wasn't much, but for a girl who had never been cared for, it felt like a lighthouse. They hadn't touched, hadn't even truly talked. But somehow, in this quiet place filled with broken art and second chances, two souls had started to reach for each other. Not fast, not loud, but true. And that was everything. The room smelled like candle wax and fabric glue. Ayo worked through the night, her hands steady despite the shaking in her chest. She'd never sewn anything this intricate before. The cloth Kola left wasn't just cloth, it was permission. A quiet "I see you" without a single word. She was stitching possibility, threading dignity into a world that had never offered her any. The dress took 3 nights. Simple, elegant, royal blue bodice, flowing ankara skirt, not meant for a runway, meant for survival, meant for her. On the 4th morning, Kola appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her, half turned toward the window, pins between her lips, fitting the dress onto a mannequin made from broomsticks and plastic bags. "Did you design that?" he asked finally. Ayo nodded, didn't turn around. "It's fearless," he said. That word made her heart skip. Fearless. She had never been called that before, not even close. Kola walked slowly into the room, eyes locked on the dress. "You know, I used to be the best sculptor in this city," he said, "until I lost my reason to shape anything." He didn't look at her, but she listened like her soul depended on it. "I thought creation was behind me, but your lines, they make me want to try again." Silence stretched, heavy, safe. Ayo finally spoke, voice barely above breath. "And your silence, it makes me feel like I'm allowed to exist." It was the first time they looked at each other that long. No flinching, no fear, just honesty. From that day they began to orbit each other. She sewed, he sculpted, and in the rhythm of shared purpose they began to heal. She left little fabric scraps near his workstation, colors he hadn't thought to use in years. He began leaving her smooth, hand-carved buttons, small, beautiful. Details only artists notice. They still barely touched, barely spoke, but they didn't need to. The gallery filled with soft echoes of scissors snipping, metal tools tapping, breaths held, hearts unfolding. Some nights she would hum while working, a soft tune, wordless, African, old. Kola never mentioned it. But once, his chisel moved in time with her melody. They were building something sacred in the quiet. Ayo started to wonder if maybe love didn't need to arrive like thunder. Maybe it could arrive like this, a quiet warmth that made broken things want to shine again. The gallery was quiet at night. Not the kind of quiet that felt empty, but the kind that wrapped around your shoulders like a woven shawl. Ayo stayed late that evening, not working, just lingering. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside her sewing table, the finished dress draped over her knees like a sleeping child. She ran her fingers over every seam, every stitch. This wasn't just fabric, it was her voice, and for the first time in her life, it had been heard. Then she heard the kettle hiss, and footsteps. Soft, familiar, uneven. Kola. He stepped into the back room, holding 2 chipped mugs filled with steaming ginger tea. "I thought maybe you'd want one," he said, clearing his throat. Io blinked. No one had ever made her tea before. Not once. She nodded. He sat across from her, close but not too close. The kind of distance that said, "I'm here, but I won't crowd you." They sipped in silence at first. Then she asked, voice gentle, "What did you lose?" Kola didn't look up. "My wife. Our baby boy. 5 years ago. Car crash. I survived, but I stopped living." Io stared into her cup, hands trembling slightly. "I never even knew what living felt like," she said. "I think I was born into survival mode, and when you spend your whole life invisible, you start to believe you were made to disappear." The words hit the air like a prayer. Heavy, raw, true. Kola's jaw clenched. His voice dropped. "But you didn't disappear. You created. That strength most people only pretend to have." Io's throat tightened. She didn't know why, but tears began to fall, slow and silent, tracing down her cheeks. Not loud sobs, just the quiet ache of finally being safe enough to cry. Kola didn't touch her, didn't try to fix it. He just let her break, and in doing that, he helped her begin to rebuild. She looked up at him through tear-glazed eyes. "Why are you being kind to me?" He met her gaze, steady now. "Because you reminded me that creation still matters, and maybe so do I." They didn't kiss, didn't hold hands, didn't say the word love, but something passed between them in that moment. A knowing, a tenderness, a promise not yet spoken aloud. Outside, the rain began to fall soft against the roof, and inside, 2 broken souls sat shoulder to shoulder in the quiet, healing, slowly, together. The gallery began to hum again, not from visitors, those were still few, but from creation. Io's dresses were growing bolder, more structured, more alive, colors that danced, fabrics that whispered royalty. And Kola, he was sculpting again, at first just shapes, blocks, curves, but slowly his hands found rhythm, his tools obeyed again, his grief still present but no longer paralyzing. The studio that once felt like a tomb now pulsed with quiet rebirth. They rarely spoke about that night of tea and tears, but something had changed since then. They moved around each other like old friends in new flames. Soft smiles, longer eye contact, a language of glances and small offerings. Kola began opening up. He showed Io a piece he'd hidden for years, a sculpture of his late wife, unfinished, beautiful, strong, one hand on her belly, eyes closed in peace. "I was working on it the week she died," he said. "I couldn't finish it, couldn't even look at it until now." Io stepped forward slowly, fingertips brushing the sculpture's edge. "She looks like she knew she was loved." Kola swallowed hard. "She was." He paused, looked at Io. "You deserve that too, you know." Io didn't respond, but her heart did, loudly. That night she brought her best fabric out, gold-lined indigo, soft, regal, reserved for a dream that once felt too distant. She began working on a gown unlike anything she had ever made. Meanwhile, Kola carved again, this time not from memory, but from presence, from now. He didn't say it aloud, but the curve of the lips he was sculpting belonged to Io. Late one evening, their hands brushed over the same roll of fabric. She didn't pull away, neither did he. There was no music, but everything slowed. Their eyes met. No fear, just electricity. "You've changed this place," Kola whispered. "You've changed me." Io's lips parted, unsure of what to say. But her eyes, they answered. They still hadn't kissed. But in that small room filled with thread and stone, art had become intimacy. Work had become worship. 2 creators, 2 hearts, 1 quiet fire, now undeniable. Io hadn't worn a dress in years, not one she made, not one she felt beautiful in. But this morning was different. There was a quiet event at the gallery, just a donor luncheon, nothing fancy. The gallery assistants wore jeans. Mama Toby offered her a blouse. But Io had other plans. She slipped into her own creation. Midnight blue, high neck, low back, embroidered neckline with soft gold threading she'd stitched by hand, fitted bodice, flowing bottom. Nothing too loud, yet impossible to ignore. She stood in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. For once, the girl staring back wasn't invisible. She was radiant, nervous but steady. Io walked into the front hall, head held just high enough. Kola was standing by a sculpture base, adjusting its lighting. He looked up and froze. Time stopped. He didn't speak, didn't blink. his breath caught in his throat like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Io swallowed, suddenly unsure. "Is it too much?" she asked. Cola stared for a beat too long, then whispered, "No, it's exactly right." She looked down, cheeks warming. He stepped closer. "You look like a dream that came to life, one someone was too afraid to believe in." Her chest tightened. No one had ever said that to her. Not even close. The gallery filled with voices, but neither of them really joined in. They stayed near the back, watching from the edges. Every now and then, Cola would glance her way, like he needed to make sure she was real. At one point, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same coffee cup. Neither pulled back. Later that evening, when everyone had gone, Io returned to the sewing room, started to remove the dress carefully. Cola walked in, holding a small folded box. "For you." She opened it. Inside, 3 handmade buttons, carved from wood, each one unique. "For your next piece," he said. She touched them gently. "Thank you for seeing me." He held her gaze. "How could I not?" They stood there, still, charged. It wasn't love yet, not fully, but it was becoming. In his eyes, she was no longer the girl who swept the floors. She was a muse, a mirror, a match to his spark, and in her chest something bloomed. Not just attraction, but belief. That she could be wanted, not for obedience, not for silence, but for who she truly was. The flyer was pinned to the community board outside the bakery. Bright colors, bold fonts, Umusa Rising National Fashion Showcase. Open to amateur designers, winner gets mentorship, press coverage, funding. Io stopped in front of it. Her heart raced. She didn't move, didn't blink. This was the kind of stage she used to sketch in her dreams. And now it was pinned on a board 6 steps from her morning bread. She reached out to touch it but pulled her hand back. Too many memories of no. Too many years of being told you're not enough. So she walked away. That night, Cola noticed the shift. She was quiet, but not her usual quiet. Restless, distracted. He didn't ask, he just waited. 2 days later, a brown envelope appeared on her sewing table. Inside, a printed application, already filled out. She stared at it in shock. "You signed me up?" she asked, eyes wide. Cola leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're ready. Even if you don't believe it, I do." Io shook her head. "They'll laugh. I'm nobody. I don't even have labels, just sketches and hand-sewn dreams. That's exactly why you'll win." She looked down at the form. The deadline was in 3 days. A choice: stay hidden or step into the fire. The next 72 hours were chaos. She barely slept, used every spare scrap of fabric she had. Borrowed threads, bartered buttons. Mama Toby brought extra rice at night, whispering, "I don't know what you're building, child, but God is watching." Cola helped where he could, sanding down mannequin stands, fixing broken zippers, setting up lights in the studio to mimic runway conditions. They didn't talk much during those days. They were in it, together. There was one moment, though, late at night. Io sat slumped on the floor, hands shaking, eyes red. "I can't do this," she whispered. Cola knelt beside her quietly, held out her sketchbook. "This came from your hands, your heart. That means the world's already changed. Now it's just about showing them." She looked up at him, her breath catching. Not from fear, but from the way he looked at her. Not like a mentor, not like a stranger, like a man who believed in her, fully, fiercely, tenderly. By the 3rd night, 5 complete outfits hung beside her. Original, proud, hers. She stood in front of them, light from the window, tracing her silhouette. And for the first time in her life, Io didn't feel like she was running away from something. She was running toward it. The morning of the fashion show, Io woke before sunrise. Her heart thudded like a drum inside a metal chest. The dresses were ready. Her name was printed on the show list. Her hands were steady, but her spirit, wavering. She dressed simply, pressed her hair into a loose bun, applied a soft line of gold above her eyelids, just enough to say, "I am here." Mama Toby hugged her. Cola didn't say much. He just looked at her with eyes that steadied storms. "No matter what happens," he said softly, "you already won." She held on to that, until she saw him, Chief Bamidele, sitting in the 3rd row of the front section, next to her uncle. Io froze, blood drained from her face. Her pulse turned to thunder in her ears. Her uncle smirked. He hadn't changed, same stiff agbada, same narrow eyes, same chilling arrogance. He locked eyes with her and mouthed, "You're still mine." The world tilted. Io stumbled back behind the stage curtain, gasping for air. Everything blurred, fabric, lights, sound, gone. She dropped to her knees, clutching her chest. I don't belong here. They'll ruin me. They'll pull me back. And then, warmth, a hand on her shoulder. Kola. He knelt beside her, his voice low, steady, a grounding flame. You are not that girl anymore. You are not theirs. You are your own. She looked at him, eyes wet. What if they drag me back? Then I will drag you forward. Silence. He wants you small. He wants you silent. Go out there and show him the sound of your brilliance. Her breath returned, her spine straightened. And when her name was called, Io stepped onto the runway. One step, then another, then 5. Spotlights followed her, cameras clicked, gasps filled the room. Her models glided behind her, skin like obsidian, gowns like royalty. Each outfit told a story, of pain, of survival, of becoming. Io didn't look at her uncle, not once, but she felt his power break like glass against concrete. Backstage, when the final model walked, the room erupted in applause. Io stood in the wings, trembling, but not from fear, from freedom. Kola joined her. No words, just presence. Their eyes met. Everything between them, what had been growing, glowing, slowly burning, shifted. No more pretending. No more holding back, just truth and fire. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room, and then the music rose. Soft African strings, slow percussion, a heartbeat turned into rhythm. Io stood just off stage behind the curtain. Her chest rose and fell like a storm inside a still body. The announcer's voice echoed, presenting our final designer of the evening, Io Tematope. The curtain opened, and the flames stepped forward. Her dresses moved like stories across the runway. Each one whispered a chapter from her soul. One dress shimmered with threads the color of twilight. Another held patterns passed down from her grandmother's village, ankle-length, high-collared, sewn with reverence. And then came the final look. A model wearing the freedom gown, royal white, gold embroidery rising like sunbeams across the fabric, bare feet, a needle charm swinging like a pendant at her chest. The crowd was silent, not confused, in awe. Even her uncle, who had once spoken over her every word, sat frozen, small, insignificant. Io didn't smile. She stood still at the end of the runway, head high. She let her work speak, because finally, people were listening. As applause erupted, something unexpected happened. The curtain behind her lifted again. And there it was, the sculpture. A bronze figure, 6 feet tall, barefoot, back arched in power, one hand holding a broken needle to the sky. The girl's face unmistakable. It was her. Mouth soft, eyes fierce. Not just surviving, rising. The crowd gasped. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the entire hall stood in ovation. Journalists surged forward. Photographers fired off shots. Designers whispered her name like prophecy. Io Tematope, who is she? Backstage, she turned to find Kola standing in the shadows. She walked toward him. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't break. She glowed. You did this? She asked. He nodded. I only shaped the stone. You gave it purpose. She reached out and took his hand. No more hesitation. No more wondering. Kola, you're not just the one who helped me create. You're the one who reminded me I was never broken. He stepped closer. You didn't need fixing. You just needed space to shine. Their foreheads touched. A moment. Still. Sacred. In that gallery of echoes and applause, the flame and the rain had finally met. Not to destroy each other, but to create something new. After the crowd faded, after the lights dimmed, after the flashbulbs stopped popping like fireworks, Io stood alone with the sculpture. It stood taller than her. Still. Proud. Eternal. Her face cast in bronze, yet alive with emotion. Not the girl who once scrubbed floors in McKinney. Not the girl who cried herself to sleep on concrete, but the woman who chose fire over fear. Her fingers brushed the metal hand raised toward the sky. Kola stepped behind her, silent as ever. But this time, she turned before he could vanish into shadows. Why me? She asked. He didn't flinch, didn't pause, because you were light long before anyone saw you. And I was drowning until you lit a match. She turned fully, standing before him. You sculpted me, in front of everyone. I didn't sculpt you, he said, voice low. I sculpted hope. I just borrowed your face. Io felt something stir deep in her. A softness that wasn't weak, a tenderness that had been waiting for permission to bloom. You saw me before I saw myself. Kola took a breath. You made me create again. You made me feel again. And now, I can't imagine silence without your voice in it. They stood inches apart, hands almost touching, eyes full of memories that hadn't even happened yet. The judges returned. Cameras too. Interviews, questions, offers. One of the organizers stepped up, flashing a grin. Io, the winner's prize is yours. A 1-year mentorship in Milan. Fully paid, international exposure, your own brand. Gasps all around. Whispers of global next big thing, Africa's rising light. But Io didn't respond immediately. She turned back to Kola. What do I do with this? She asked him. Not afraid, just unsure. He looked at her with full eyes. You take it, you go, you build the world you once only dared to draw. And you, I'll be here, sculpting, waiting, always watching your light. She stared at him, and then, finally, she kissed him. No music, no drama, just truth meeting truth. 2 artists, 2 survivors, 2 hearts that had waited long enough. Outside, the night bloomed over Umusa like a painting. And somewhere deep inside both of them, something whispered, we made it. The morning after the showcase, Io woke to a new world. Her name was trending. Fashion blogs called her the voice of ancestral elegance. Radio shows replayed clips from her speech. Designers from Accra to Johannesburg wanted to meet her. For the first time in her life, people weren't just listening, they were amplifying. She stepped outside the gallery, sunlight painting her cheeks in gold. Reporters waited, cameras followed, but her eyes stayed steady, her feet grounded. She knew fame could fade, but dignity, that she'd built from fire and fabric. Then she saw him, standing by the gate like a stain on her joy, her uncle. Arms folded, eyes full of menace, as if nothing had changed. So you think you've made it now? He barked. You forget who fed you, who raised you? Io didn't flinch. Not anymore. She walked forward, slow and sure. Reporters turned their cameras. Microphones lifted. The moment was hers. You didn't raise me, she said calmly. You tried to bury me, but I grew anyway. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her uncle stepped forward. You're still nothing without us. Don't let this little success confuse you. And then Kola appeared, beside her, solid, unshaken, eyes sharp as sculptor's tools. This girl you tried to erase, he said, his voice ringing clear, is now a global designer with talent recognized across borders. You saw her silence, I saw her flame, and now the world does too. Io stood taller, not from pride, but peace. She turned to the cameras. There are many girls like me, forgotten, abused, discarded, but we are not broken. We are building futures out of ashes. The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was thunderous. Io's uncle backed away, stunned, small, unimportant, just as he had once made her feel. The balance had shifted. Later that night, Io sat on the rooftop with Kola, their hands entwined. Below them, the city buzzed with light. Above them, the stars pulsed like promises. You didn't just reclaim your name, Kola whispered. You gave others the courage to reclaim theirs. Io smiled. We did it, not just for us, but for every girl who's ever been told she doesn't belong. 3 weeks after the show, Io stood in front of her packed suitcase. Inside were sketches, wrapped fabrics, and a visa stamped with possibility. She was going to Milan. Her designs would be worn on international runways. She'd be learning from the best, creating with the world's eyes watching. But her heart, still tethered to one gallery, to one man, to one truth. She walked to the sculpture room one last time. There it stood. Her likeness in bronze, timeless, fierce. The girl who had once been silenced, now immortalized in strength. Kola entered behind her, quietly as always. You ready? He asked. She turned, smiled gently. Ready to go, not ready to leave. He stepped closer. You were always going to fly. I just kept the wind steady beneath you. Io exhaled, her eyes shimmered. You did more than that. You loved me back into myself. Kola blinked, his voice dropped to a whisper. And you reminded me I could still feel, still shape, still live. They stood in that sacred space, between past and future, between goodbye and forever. Io took his hand. I'm not asking you to follow. I'm asking you to believe there's a version of us that doesn't end here. He held her face, his thumb brushing her cheek like she was made of silk. I already believe that. Because love like this doesn't fade. It roots, it waits, it builds. That night, under the fading sun, they walked through the streets of Umusa. No crowd, no cameras, just 2 souls, full of everything they once thought they'd lost. People passed them, some recognizing Io, some not. She didn't need the spotlight, she was the light. And Kola, he didn't need to sculpt fame, he had already shaped something eternal. Her, them. Before leaving for the airport, Io slipped a final sketch into Kola's hand. A new gown, one not for runways or cameras, a wedding dress. Simple, strong, stunning. He looked up, stunned. She leaned in, whispered, not yet, but someday. he smiled. And in that smile lived everything. Every broken piece that had been made whole, every silence that had turned into song, every scar that had become part of the art. Sometimes the flame doesn't burn out in the rain, it learns to dance. And sometimes the rain doesn't arrive to put out the fire, it comes to help it grow.